God has placed us in a unique time in the history of the world, the information age. Advancements in technology have revolutionized our lives through smartphones, social media, and the internet. Always connected, always within reach, yet we're lonelier and more distracted than ever. As followers of Jesus, how do we maximize the blessing of technology without having it master our lives? Join us as we explore the important and timely intersection of faith and technology.
Hey, so we're starting on a new series, Faith and Technology, and I thought to start us out, if you have your Bibles with you, you can go ahead and open them. We're going to be Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, but also wanted to ask you a question just to get your minds thinking through the topic at hand. And many of you may have already seen this meme, but here's my question for all of you. What was your first phone? The one. I'm hearing a lot of ones. Wow, the brick, yeah. 80s was a better time. All right, so as we are all chuckling about that, let me also throw a person to mind. How many of you guys have read the Little House on the Prairie books? Couple. Oh, okay. I hear some enthusiasts. Yeah, I love those books. So Laura Ingalls Wilder, she wrote the Little House on the Prairie books. She was born in 1867, which was 2 years after Abraham Lincoln was killed. And what's interesting is she died in 1957, which was 12 years before the moon landing. She was born in pioneer times and died in the space age. Think about that for a moment. Our world has changed drastically in only the last 10 years. Check out this slide. Think about how different our world is since only 2007. In 2007, the iPhone hit the market, Facebook went public, Netflix started instant streaming, Twitter was invented. And in 2013, the UN released global statistics that said out of the estimated 7 billion people that populate planet Earth, around 6 billion own a cell phone, 5 billion a smartphone. And get this, only 4.5 billion have indoor plumbing. So more people own a smartphone than a toilet. This has incredibly shaped our society, our culture, what it means to be human. Technology surrounds us. We drive it, we ride it, we listen to it. I'm talking into it and looking off of it right now. We live in it all the time. We are in the technological revolution, the information age, the digital generation. We're connected 24/7. 365 days a year. And things like artificial intelligence, automation, self-driving cars, robotics, they aren't the things of sci-fi anymore, but of ever-increasing reality. And so let's do an informal poll for a second. If you own a smartphone, go ahead and hold it up for a second. How many here own some form of smartphone? Okay, like pretty much everybody. Okay. All right, so what's interesting is that this little device that we pretty much take for granted has really revolutionized and changed our entire lives. Being in the digital age presents all new blessings and all new potential problems. But here is the challenge. This is all new. This is all new. We have no frame of reference, no wisdom from past generations that came before us. How do we parent? How do we avoid distraction and temptation? How do we maximize the potential while minimizing the pitfalls? How does our Christian life interact and intersect with the technology that we use every single day? And so there's no chapter and verse for the iPhone, for text messaging, and for Snapchat. But I want us to start where the Bible starts, and I want us to begin to think about this subject, this important reality of technology, because the Bible does address technological advancement. So I want us to start with a theology of technology, a theology of technology. So we're going to start in Genesis, and my first point is that technology is commanded in the cultural mandate. So Genesis 1:28, God creates mankind. He tells them to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, to have dominion. And he continues on in Genesis 2:5. He places the man in the garden to, as it says, work the ground. Genesis 2:11, the description of Eden talks about rivers that flow through it and precious metals underneath it. Those metals will need to be discovered and extracted through technology. Genesis 2:15 says that God puts mankind in the garden to work it and to keep it, to cultivate, to maximize the production of the soil. And so therefore, in God's original cultural mandate, we see technology is really coupled in to his call for humanity. Technology is going to be required to feed the kids as we fill the earth and multiply. Technology is going to be required to have dominion, to build bridges and cross rivers and plant gardens and build cities. And so we are really, in some way, commissioned to invent, to create technology. And we use technology all the time in fundamental ways. Adam and Eve would use technology to reorder the raw materials of the soil, to shape them, to build a garden for human flourishing. Chefs use technology to reorder raw materials of food into meals. Carpenters reorder raw material of lumber and nails into homes. Chemists reorder organic and synthetic elements into medicines. There is technology happening all around us for the betterment of society, for human flourishing. And so I need us to see that as we look at technology, the invention of the iPhone, GPS, artificial intelligence, automation, it isn't somehow disconnected from the scriptures. It isn't disconnected from the story of the Bible. Rather, it's an outworking of the cultural mandate. But things go terribly wrong. When we think about technology, we often think about how it has hurt, wounded, and misshapen mankind. So point number 2, technology is misused and misappropriated because of sin. For those of you who might not be familiar with the story of the Bible, what happens, God creates man, we rebel against him. We choose our own way. We want life without God. And we see that then technology takes on new meanings and new shapes. In Genesis 4:19 through 20, we have 2 individuals that begin to build weapons for the purpose of murder and revenge. In Genesis 11, we have an entire society that begins to build a temple with the significance in the view of establishing their human autonomy in rebellion. We will be like God. In Exodus 32, you see the people of God using technology to form an idol, a new God, one that they will worship. So technology is used for terrible evil, but it's also used for good. Point number 3, technology. God sovereignly ordains the use of technology to spread the gospel. Think about this. In the history of the church, this great tradition that we partake of as believers in the early church, the Roman roads connected the entire ancient world, allowing for the spread of the gospel. Papyrus allowed for the writing of letters that we even enjoy today. That's technology, fundamentally, that our Bibles are. Advanced transportation, such as ships, allowed early missionaries to get to new places. And then, in the Reformation that we'll be celebrating coming up in October, the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, Gutenberg's printing press allowed for the Bible to be distributed and translated, for the gospel to be recovered, for the everyday peasant to be able to pick up the Holy Scriptures. And in the modern church, think about technology's impact on the Great Commission. The telegraph, the phone, the radio, the television, the internet, the smartphone. There is now no closed nation. Teaching is available all the time, anywhere. Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. We are living in that time because of technological advancement. So what is the Christian response to technology in the digital age? I think there is, well, I'll do 2 extremes, and I hope we'll probably all fall in one category. But first, I would say there's the boosters. The boosters are the early adopters, the technological just crazies, right? They read, they think, they love technology in any and every form, right? It's an unquestioning, enthusiastic acceptance of all things new. right? And it's by technology we will solve most of the world's problems. Then, and I'm sure there's adequate representation from both of these populations. Then there's the boosters, and then on the other side, we'll say there's the knockers, right? These are traditionalists, right? I'm skeptical. I have a skeptical rejection of anything new. I kind of admire the good old days, and if we could just go back to the 1930s or 50s or however we define the good old days, things would be better, right? And so we sort of outrightly reject technology. We think it's ruining us and ruining what it means to be human. And so as Christians, how do we understand and interact with technology? And I would say technology can be a useful tool if we use it to accomplish our threefold purpose in life as Christians. And it is this: the cultural mandate to create. This is what you do, your 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. The great commandment to love. This is what you do, family, friends, coworkers, neighbors. And then the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus, God who came to be with us, to love us, to save us, and to forgive us. So is technology good or bad? Let me use a practical illustration. We got a pretty simple form of technology right here, right? The shovel. Is the shovel good or bad? Is the shovel good or bad? Good? Okay. I don't know who said that, but that's where I'm going. It kind of depends on how you use it, right? Because the obvious blessing of a shovel is, man, you can move a whole lot of dirt, and that's fantastic, right? But you could also use this thing for some pretty nefarious purposes too, right? You could really mess someone up with this. Now, as we're thinking about is technology good or bad, I want us to actually think of a different question, and that is, what does technology do to us? See, we can debate whether the shovel is good or bad, but what I want us to think about is, what does the shovel actually do to us? If I sit here and I dig for a really long time, this tool that we've made will begin to make me. This tool we've shaped will begin to shape me. I'll begin to get callous hands and an aching back because the technology that we make affects us. And so if a shovel can affect us in that way, how much more the glowing rectangle in every one of our pockets right now? What effect might this be having for us, regardless of whether we use it for good or for ill? I love the way one famous, and many of you may be familiar with this quote, one famous author said it this way: technology is a useful servant, but a dangerous master. So here's the problem. Statistically, especially after 2007, statistically, technology is becoming that dangerous master in the lives of even many Christians. And as Christians, our declaration is that Jesus is Lord, not our smartphone. And so, what's interesting is, what does it mean that technology might be becoming a dangerous master in our lives? How many of you, by show of hands, would say you may find your phone a teeny weeny bit distracting sometimes, on occasion? Okay? So apparently most people check their phone every 4.5 minutes. Have you ever gotten that phantom ringing thing where you're like, oh, no, never mind. It wasn't actually a call. Never mind. You probably will check your phone then statistically about 8 times during this sermon. Technology is distracting us to death. And at this moment, think about this. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of friends, family members, or total strangers can interrupt you at any time. At any time. And only 8% of people actually change the default notifications on their apps. So we are at the whim of the app designers. We're at the mercy of anyone who has our contact information or is a friend or connected to us. They can interrupt us at any time. They can ring, buzz, turn lights on. Imagine this. If I told you this wonderful little Frozen microphone that my girls love so much, imagine if I said, okay, everyone is getting one of these, and all of your family, friends, and total strangers can turn this thing on anytime they want, anytime in the day or night, right? We might go, that's probably not a super great deal, right? This might be a little bit distracting all the time. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think, right? And how many of us, our life is just a bunch of noises and beeps and obnoxious notifications and lights, and we're living on someone else's agenda. Kind of interesting to think about. So it's curious, a recent Barna study showed that 95% of parents say that the hardest thing about parenting nowadays is technology. They say discipline, time management, character development, sexual purity, they're the most challenging areas to know how to parent in the digital age. And it's interesting because a child born today, by the time they turn 7, will have spent 1 year looking into a screen. The equivalent of 1 year looking into a screen. This is a massive new weight that's developing around us. Hebrews 12:1 says it this way. The author of Hebrews is writing to the Christian congregation, and he's encouraging them to stay faithful to Jesus in the midst of persecution. But he uses this very interesting distinguishing. He says, Hebrews 12, verse 1, he says, let us also lay aside every weight in the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And so he's making a distinction. There's something that he's calling weight that's different than sin, but it's also destructive. It's also distracting. It's also unhelpful. So smartphones, and I need you guys to hear this, smartphones, social media, they're not sinful, but the digital life brings a lot of new and potentially unnecessary weight into our life. We're living with the entire world and all of human knowledge in our back pocket. So the weight of digital distraction and information overload is a real thing. And let me ask you this, just to get a feeling for how many people actually feel this pressure. How many of you, by show of hands, have gone online maybe to read an article or find a recipe, and 30 minutes later you find yourself taking a survey about which Disney princess you are or something, and then all of a sudden your wife turns to you and she's like, what are you doing? And you stop and think for the first time in about 25 minutes, and you're like, absolutely nothing. Like, nothing. And it's almost on auto fire. I've completely wasted my time. And so it's interesting because here's some kind of fun statistics for you. So 61% of people admit using their mobile phones while going to the bathroom now. And 9% of those people have dropped those phones into the toilet. And then 12% of Americans admit that sometimes they'll even take their phones into the shower with them as well. So I want us to see something from the scriptures, from Hebrews, that there's two categories in the scriptures, right? And usually when we think about the Christian life, and it's good that we do this, we think about the category of sin and righteousness, obedience and honoring God. But the scriptures also present another category, which can be very helpful for us, and that is the category of wisdom and folly. Because God created the world, therefore he knows how we best live in it by the rules and laws that he has created. So let me illustrate this. It's not necessarily a sin to spend your weekend binge watching House of Cards or Stranger Things or ESPN, but it might be foolish. In fact, when you binge on anything, it's usually unhelpful. So I'm not sure why we make an exception for TV. The time that we spend, we could be spending in wiser things. And I think we all feel this, connecting with our spouse, playing with our kids, reading a book, learning, developing a hobby. Is our life marked by consuming or creating? Is our life marked by consuming or creating? It might not be a sin to spend 6 hours on Pinterest or playing Overwatch or Call of Duty. It's just a waste of time. All the clicking, scrolling, tapping, liking, sharing, technology can often distract us from what we really want and what's really best for us. And so I want us to really be self-critical because it's the only way we're gonna grow. And in this area in particular, I think I've seen a lot of self-justification and a lot of oversight, meaning I don't even wanna think about it. And so what ways does the use of digital technology distract me from what God has called me to do? In what ways has the screen in front of me become a substitute for the people right behind it? So our goal is to recognize when and where distraction pops up and develop a disciplined use of digital technology. So let me give you the areas we're distracted. One, we use digital technology to avoid work. And here's why this is important. What did God create us for? Work. So this is a distraction from the cultural mandate he gave humanity. And we often use digital tech to escape or procrastinate hard things like work deadlines, tough conversations, piles of laundry, school projects, and papers. The average American college student wastes 20% of class time tinkering on a digital device. I remember when I went back to seminary for the first time, I was super excited. It's very expensive. I had everything lined up. I was kind of sitting in the back, right? And I remember the professor came in and he started talking. I'm looking around. I'm like, why is everyone on a computer? I was like writing on a notepad. I'm an old timer. Anyways, and I'm looking around and nobody seems to be, or maybe they're all multitasking, but everybody is checking their fantasy football stats and looking on social media and arranging the worship stuff on Planning Center. And nobody has closed the thing and is just connecting with where they are and who God has put in front of them. And it's interesting because I talk to a lot of teachers and there's mixed opinions on this. By and large, most teachers would say technology brings very little to the educational process and often can be a major distraction. Proverbs 12:11, wisdom literature says this: whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. And you need to know, you and I need to know, and following the lordship of Jesus and pursuing what he wants for our life, there's a whole industry built around distracting us into spending all of our time in what the Bible would call worthless pursuits. It's interesting when you think about this. Instead of, as the scripture says, working our land and having plenty of bread, what we end up doing in the digital world is working somebody else's land. Think about it this way. When you are playing Candy Crush or looking at different sports scores or just kind of wasting time milling around, our online activity, every click, every visit, every view is monetized. And people are making money off of our online activity. Companies will do anything to keep us hooked and keep us online. And the longer we're online, the more likely our friends and family will be as well. So we must be disciplined because new digital media, and this is very interesting, is fundamentally designed to hook us. Think about this. It's limitless. There's no stopping point to it. In the olden days, you would wake up, you would take out your newspaper, you would read it, and when you were finished with the newspaper, that was it. In fact, in the olden days, I can remember when you would watch a TV show, and after the TV show, there would be no other programming, and it would just fade to fuzz, and that would be it. Nowadays, there is this feedback loop designed to make hyper small, hyper palatable items so that you have just continued viewing. And if you're not self-disciplined, you'll get trapped in this loop. So there's Instaplay, so you just binge watch on Netflix and you just go right into the next episode. Social media, you can keep scrolling forever. There's never an end. There's no clear ending. And so out of obedience to Jesus and love for others and self-discipline, we must approach technology in an intentional way, recognizing that new digital technologies are designed to distract, are designed to hook us, to suck us in, and to keep us there. And we were made to be creators, not consumers. So I don't want to say all technology needs to be banned, but I do want to say that for every family, there needs to be a plan. We were made to be creators, not consumers. So, do we use technology meaningfully for a purpose, or do we approach technology meaninglessly, aimlessly, and purposelessly? Technology was given to us and can be a great tool if it's used for a purpose with intentionality. And so, do you use, a question for you, in your families, do you use digital technology to create or to consume? Have you set up your workplace and your home in a way that rewards creativity and not just consuming? It's a great book for those of you who have families and are wondering, how do I survive in the digital age and raise kids? Andy Crouch from the Barna Group and from Christianity Today wrote a book called The Tech-Wise Family. In it, he uses this illustration where he talks about the old house used to be, the center of the house was the hearth, the fire. You would come around it for warmth and fellowship and friendship. You would need to maintain the fire. There was creativity, connection, community, and reward. And now the center of most of our homes is the television. And we anesthetize ourselves via entertainment. And we wonder, why can I not understand what my motivations are? Why do I feel so disconnected from my spouse? Perhaps we've taken a good thing and given it too much preeminence in our house. So we use digital distractions to avoid work. We also use digital distractions to avoid people. Remember the threefold purpose of our lives. We are called to work, the cultural mandate. We're also called to love others. It's the great commandment. And we can use digital distractions to avoid people. If you've been alive, right, for any length of time, you've learned people aren't easy, right? They're messy, relationships are complicated, emotions are confusing, motivations can be very ambiguous at times. And so it's easy, especially for a younger generation that's digital natives, to simply retreat into the safety and control of the digital world. In fact, there's even a new term. Many of you are familiar with snubbing someone. Now there's phubbing, which is basically snubbing someone with your phone by ignoring them, not paying attention to them, just burying yourself in your phone. And the irony of the digital age is just this, that we're never really alone and we're never really with other people. See, we have to be intentional and disciplined to be alone in a fruitful way and to be with others in a fruitful way. Otherwise, there's always half of our attention is going somewhere else. And there's a very interesting study called, where they coined this term called brain drain. And if you think, oh, I'm not really addicted to my phone, or I'm not distracted by it, what they found is that even if you silence your phone and even if you put it down like this, a part of you, if it gets boring or it gets difficult or you're just you don't really care, you start thinking about all the possibilities of what you could be doing on this, what could be happening on that. And some of your attention is going to this, whether it's in your hand and you're staring at it or not. So as Christians, I think we have to follow the model of Jesus and we have to practice real solitude. In his ministry, he would go away into lonely places. You see that phrase repeated over and over again in the Gospels. And it was a time of silence and solitude and prayer so that he could say, not my will, but yours be done. He could know his identity. He probably studied in the book of Isaiah, talking about the suffering servant, knowing his identity, his mission, what he is called to. And we, as his followers, must do likewise. In fact, even just in a general sense, silence, solitude, and reflection is powerful. Statistically, most of you probably feel like you're losing your mind and losing your memory. And what's interesting is that digital technology is actually not really helping that process. Because what used to happen, there was this thing in the 90s called boredom, right? You may have heard of it. And what would happen is that in the silence and in times of reflection, your short-term memory would be able to move to your long-term memory. But the problem now, though, is that every time you're thinking about something like, oh, does that apply to me? How can I use that? Like, what? Oh, I got a text. I got Twitter. Oh, shoot, okay, and you just get distracted. And we miss what God has for us. Have you ever said this? I don't even know why I said that. I don't even know why I did that. I don't even know what my motivation was there. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says, the purpose of a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. It takes time, it takes reflection, it takes solitude and prayer to know even who you are and what your motivations are and what's really driving you. And so few of us take that time. Now, we need to practice real solitude. We also need to practice real community. See, and I think this is one of the things that, especially in the digital age, the local church and the family, there is no substitute for them. I hear people all the time, I don't really need to go to church. I podcast, I listen to worship music, but there's something here in this moment with human beings next to you that you can do here that you cannot do through a phone. You can interact, you can hug, you can cry, you can pray for others. We have an opportunity that cannot be replicated digitally. And people talk about the online church, and I shrug my head because God has intended through the incarnation of Jesus to elevate the blessedness of embodied presence. Meaning this, He meant for us to be here in the time and place we are, loving the people next to us. So as Christians, with smartphones, with all this technology, my encouragement is, especially as families and raising kids, we have to prioritize character over convenience. Because now we have a lot of convenience. We have to prioritize character over comfort. Let me give you a practical example. You're driving somewhere, your kids are in the back seat, they're screaming at each other, there's some kind of argument. Now we have this new possibility that was never, ever even possible. And we could say, hey guys, watch this show. And immediately they stop arguing, they're anesthetized, they're just hypnotized by entertainment. And we go, finally, some peace and quiet. But what did we just miss in that process? Now our kids missed an opportunity to learn how to be bored, to learn how to resolve a conflict, to learn how to handle their emotions. We must be very, very careful that we don't just use technology, but we recognize its impact on us. And as Christians, we must prioritize character over comfort and character over convenience. We are to labor so that Christ is formed in us and in our children. And I really want us to be cautious about how we use technology. 71% of people go to bed with their phone, and that's a precious, precious time. When you are tired, when you're a little bit more emotionally open and vulnerable, when you could connect with your spouse, when you could have a conversation, when you could pray, and instead we do the lesser thing, which is just on our phones. So, are we creating space and are we shaping our lives so that our phones go to bed before we do and our phones wake up after us? Our phones go into a basket or get turned off at family dinner time, and we engage one another and we have control and discipline because we do not want to be distracted from what God has called us to, the great commandment to love one another. Then finally, we use digital technologies to avoid God. This is the distraction from the Great Commission. Romans 1 says it this way, claiming to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images, resembling mortal men, birds, animals, and creeping things. On Instagram, you can look through the Explore thing and you can be seeing 15 images at the same time. Technology is great at giving us knowledge, but technology cannot give us wisdom. So we can have instant access to more information than our ancestors could ever dream, but that does not make us wiser. Because wisdom comes through relationship, difficulty, experience, suffering, disappointment. Wisdom comes through the fear of the Lord. And so the scriptures say that Christians are to practice hospitality. And now with digital information and technology, man, you can find every reference to hospitality in the Bible. You can look it up in the Greek. You can listen to endless amounts of sermons on hospitality. You can watch videos about how other people have practiced hospitality. But digital technology cannot allow us to practice hospitality. Digital technology can give us knowledge, but not wisdom. And so many are turning up the sound, turning up the entertainment, and shallowing their souls. What happens? Unchecked distractions can blind the souls from God. Jesus warns us in the parable of the sower that there are certain people, the seeds go out, they land on certain ground, they grow up, they sprout up immediately, and then he warns us and says this, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. There is a sort of vanity of the digital world in which we're anxious and worried and frustrated and focused on things that don't even matter or we have no impact or control of. God has put you here in Vancouver, Washington at Summit View Church on this Sunday morning, nowhere else. How will you use this time? Digital distractions can also close off communication with God. You all know the story of Mary and Martha. Mary sitting at Jesus' feet, Martha serving everybody else, running around, doing 1,000 different things, and Jesus slows her down and says, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. How many of us could he say that to today? But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So many of us, our anxieties, our sense of security, all depends on what the latest headline is and what our phone tells us, because we're not being renewed by the word, we're not sitting at Jesus' feet, we're not learning the one most important thing that cannot be taken away from us. Distraction can destroy us. Unchecked distraction mutes the urgency of the mission of God. Paul writes to the Corinthian church and he says, I say this to your benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. I love that term, undivided devotion to the Lord. And he's writing in the context of singleness and marriage. And he says, hey, they're both wonderful gifts, for different reasons and given to people in different seasons, but they're not ultimate reality. And therefore, they should not have ultimate priority in our life. Do our lives as followers of Jesus have a sense of urgency for the things of God? And so, there are 100 distracted driving accidents every single day. Right? Being distracted is literally costing people their life. And digital technology can be a helpful complement, but it can never be an alternative to being present where God has you, practicing neighborly love and service to the people God has put right in front of you. Let us be careful to be present and not miss it by just looking at screens. As disciples of Jesus in the digital age, we want to look at Jesus' example, and I love it in Hebrews 4:14. It says, since we have a high priest, that is an intercessor. In the Old Testament, the high priest would stand on behalf of the people in the presence of God and would offer sacrifices for sin. It says, since we have a high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. God didn't send an idea or a concept or a word from heaven. He sent the word from heaven, a person, to be with us, to dwell with us, to take on human flesh in the incarnation, to feel the feelings we feel, to experience the temptations we experience, to be with us in the reality of the human life. Jesus is altogether different than any other religious founder. He's been tempted in every way we have, yet without sin. And so because he is righteous, he can give us his righteousness. And I love the way it says this. Let us then with confidence draw near the throne of grace. And I think so many of the people that we love and want to see meet Jesus, they turn up the volume and turn up the distraction out of a motivation of fear. They don't have confidence in the silence and solitude because the condemnation of the enemy in their own conscience accuses them. And it is only through Jesus that we can have true solitude, true silence, and true peace, because we can, with confidence, draw near to God. He is not a wrathful tyrant. He is a loving Father because my sin has been removed. So we can have confidence to draw near the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace in times of need.